Hi, I'm Ben Schwartz. I'm hosting an ongoing series here at Public Access called Politics 2012. And I'm here today with John Walsh, the chair of the Massachusetts State Democratic Party, and State Representative Don Humason, who lives in Westfield. He represents the 4th Hampden District. John, of course, is a Democrat, and Rep. Humason is a Republican. So we hope to have an informative and lively conversation about some issues and elections that everybody out there knows about at the moment. What I will say, though, is that the sort of part of the parameters of conversations that we prefer to have here based on facts. And it's okay to have opinions, it's okay to have your perspective, but facts are facts. The sky is up. And I don't think there's anybody out here who can contradict that. Some of the discourse in politics these days, as we all know, orients around questionable facts. And facts should not be open to question. And that's one of the issues that I think we should address in this conversation. But before we go there, I just wanted to ask you a sort of overarching question, John. Why are you a Democrat? What does that mean for you? And what are the values that you believe are represented best by your party?
Thanks. Thank you very much, Ben. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with the representative. I've been a Democrat forever. My parents were Democrats. Both of my parents, I'm a first-generation American. Both of my parents, immigrants here from Ireland. My dad came over in a boat, and when they arrived, they were very anxious to become part of America, and they found some struggles. And the Democratic Party was in their community, reached out and was able to help them navigate and understand the way it goes. So it starts with that. I also spent 12 years in Catholic schools, where my orientation from the wonderful nuns was economic and social justice issues. And I think that in that context, I was reinforced in my democratic upbringing. I continue in this role and dedicate more of my life to it, because I think while the Democratic Party isn't right every time, I think we have been historically a party that has tended to help bend the curve towards economic and social justice over the history of time. Working people, average folks, building that ladder for people to attain success and move up the ladder of success. We've always been on the edge of civil rights and women's rights and so forth and so on, and we continue to do that today. And for that reason, and I guess at the end of the day, one of the biggest differences between the parties may be what role government plays. And I am someone who believes that government, to quote Deval Patrick, isn't here to solve everybody's problems, but is here to be an active partner to help people help themselves. And
sure.
All those things add up for me to be enthusiastic in my role.
Well, you are that indeed. It's interesting you mentioned your Catholic upbringing, because of course there are people who will point to the teachings of the Catholic Church as a reason to be on the right, and then there are people who point to the teachings of the Catholic Church as a reason to be on the left. Now, as you know, I don't remember her name, but the head of the Nuns on the Bus,
yes,
spoke prominently at the Democratic Convention. And I'm curious as to how you view that sort of split in the Catholic sort of political spectrum.
Well, I think Catholicism is not a political party. So there are elements of what my church teaches that really align very closely with my political beliefs, and there are other places where they're different. I think that they are, in this country, we have, thank goodness, a freedom of religion, so that those different churches and denominations and belief systems get to operate freely. I don't find, there are definitely some things, like with, I think, most people of faith, that my church does not define every position I hold, and I agree with some, I disagree with others, and I struggle with some. I think that's true of most people. I think that I'm not a historian of the Catholic Church, but
Right.
my reading of that history is that there has always been a more liberal and a more conservative, in today's terminology, strain of Catholicism, and I guess I probably fall on the more liberal side.
Understood. Which is a great segue to my question for you, Don, which is, speaking of the more conservative side, why are you a Republican? What's the history of that for you, and what are the values that the Republican Party represents that make you affiliate that way?
Well, Ben, thank you for asking. It was interesting to listen to John talk because I couldn't disagree with a lot of what he said about his reasoning for being a Democrat and his upbringing as a Catholic. I'm a Christian as well, but a Protestant. I never really thought that there'd be a lot of impact on our religion as to our parties, but I guess there probably is. I'm a Republican now. I've been Republican probably since the late 80s, early 90s. A lot of people my age credit Ronald Reagan with having them become Republicans, maybe switch over from being Democrats to become Republicans. When I first registered to vote, I registered as a Democrat. I was a student at a public college, and I thought it was just the thing to do. I figured most people were Democrats, and I should register as a Democrat. I didn't actually know at the time what the parties believed in, and I think the parties evolve over the years and have different beliefs, but I've been all three. I went from being a Democrat to being an independent, from being an independent to being a Republican, and from that point have stayed as a Republican. And I credit largely the influences of people who I knew from my own community of Westfield. Steve Pierce, I talked to John off camera earlier. Steve Pierce was my state representative when I was in high school. And I had a chance to meet him on a trip to Boston. I thought he was a very likable person. I admired him. I admired his work in our community. And I found out later that Steve was a Republican. When he ran for governor, I realized that my vote for him wouldn't really help because I was a Democrat. So I changed to become an independent. And the more I worked with Steve and worked with his campaign and got to know what his issues were, I thought, you know what, if I'm going to really support him as an individual, I should go all the way and register as a Republican. And it was really at that age, that at that time in my life, when I decided to really get into knowing what it was I believed and why I believed. And I just found that the Republican ideals of a emphasis on individuality, a small government that allowed individuals to be sort of all that they could be, one that wasn't overly burdensome on individuals or on businesses. That was a government that I thought was the best style of government. And looking at presidents like Lincoln and Reagan, and looking at people like Steve Pierce and then Mike Knappich, who became my boss as a young man. I went to work for him as a legislative aide in the Massachusetts House. I surrounded myself with people that I admired, and they tended to be Republicans. Although I certainly had many, many friends who were Democrats and admired the fact that they were so politically active. But my beliefs have been shaped by people like Steve and Mike and Mitt Romney and others who have been strong Republicans in Massachusetts.
Right, right. Now, given that we are in Western Massachusetts, and there's a debate this evening, Senate debate in Springfield, obviously, you know, there is life west of the 50% border in Worcester. And, you know, I'm curious as to both of your perspectives on the importance of Western Massachusetts, both in the sort of, you know, cultural, economic life of Massachusetts as well as the political life. You know, this is a less populated part of the Commonwealth, sure, but an important part and one that can swing an election.
It's a fight that we fight every day as Western Mass legislators, representatives or senators here from the 4 Western counties, always trying to remind our friends in the Boston area that we exist, that we're out here, and that you know, it's not just Eastern New York State. We are a part of Massachusetts and a part that should be reckoned with. The problem has always been that our population is small, and the number of legislators representing the area is small. By comparison, I say that the city of Boston alone has the same number of representatives as all of the 4 Western counties.
Right.
So our job is harder. What happens is Republicans and Democrats in the legislature from the 4 Western counties tend to work together, by and large, on issues that are parochial to our region of the state. Right. And so it takes that kind of collaboration to, I'm not going to say fight our friends in Boston, but to work with our friends in Boston and kind of remind them that we exist and that we're important.
And it's not just the commute that makes it difficult to represent.
Well, there are a lot of differences between us. It's a beautiful part of the state. John, you've seen it as you come out, and we have the benefit of living here, but this is a great area of the Commonwealth, and we lacks some of the problems that our larger urban centers have, like Boston, Lawrence, and although out here in Springfield and Holyoke, we still have some issues like that too. But then we also have the beautiful geography, and we have the nice natural resources and the wonderful people here, and that makes to me, it makes a big difference. I'm really proud to represent Westfield and represent Western Massachusetts when I go to work at the State House each day.
Now, politically, Western Massachusetts is more democratic.
I think the entire state is probably more democratic.
No, that's true. But on balance, I would imagine, and John would know this better than I, the left part of the Commonwealth, looking down at the map, is also left politically, as a general matter. Now,
well, I know certainly where we are in Amherst, it sticks out as a bright blue spot on the map for sure.
Right, understood. That said, though, in the 2010 special election, Scott Brown was successful in winning some parts of the Commonwealth around Westfield, for example.
Right, we're really strong for him in southern and western Hampden County.
Right, and these are parts of the Commonwealth that voted for President Obama in the '08 election. And I'm curious, and John, please answer this. What do you think the State Democratic Party and the Warren campaign need to do to shift the direction of some of those voters?
So, I'm a Go 413. To be here in Amherst is an example of one of the strengths of Western Massachusetts, the educational and cultural resources. One thing that's absolutely true is Western Mass does have a collaborative legislative delegation from both parties. You see some of the great successes in Western Mass of continually revitalizing some of the small cities here. Westfield's a great example. North Adams is, Pittsfield. You move in Northampton. Now you see that really happening a lot in Holyoke is really moving, and Springfield has always been. One of the interesting dynamics when you look at Western Mass, it was the one when I was working. I was proud to be Governor Patrick's campaign manager in '05 and '06. And after moving around in a lot, and of course the governor has a particular love for Western Mass, he spends a lot of time here, but his perspective of looking at, say, Springfield as the center of New England, the crossroads of two major highways, the capacity and the work he's done to enhance rail connections and so forth and build those things. It's just a huge difference. As Democrats, the way we win elections is on the ground. And I think that is a reflection of how we hope to be very successful in about 4 weeks. We have 6 or 7 offices in the 4 western counties.
Sure.
We have, I think, I meant to check this on the way out. I think we're closing on a dozen field staff that are working here every day, engaging. Of course, our success is always built, like the Republicans, with local activists who build a real core of continuing activism, not just for election time, but month in and month out. And those things are really strong here in Western Massachusetts,
right,
for us. And I think that when you get past much of the differences, though, I think most people in Westfield and most people in my town of Abington probably agree on most things. So, the general direction, we're going to disagree on some of the specifics, and that's where the contrasts come. But like any place, and unfortunately, like sometimes doesn't happen, the big way to win in an area is to respect it, show up, work hard, be there. And that's our goal.
And of course, one needs to believe in and stand behind one's policy positions, which are really the operative concern.
Sure.
And as I mentioned at the outset, it is one thing to have an opinion or a policy based on facts, but the facts themselves should not change. And
our perspectives on facts change, certainly depending on
that's right.
You're part of the Commonwealth, where you're from in the state. I often talk to my colleagues out there who have some really interesting perspectives about us in Western Mass. They think it takes longer to go west than it does to go east.
Uh-huh.
And I tell them I get there, and I drive east in the morning for 2 hours to go to work, and then I drive west for 2 hours.
Downhill, right?
And when they come, it feels like that sometimes. And then when they come west, they have to book an overnight room and plan on staying for a couple of days. But when I talk to colleagues or friends who are interested in running for public office, whether it's state representative or state senate or any office, I actually direct them to that great Democrat, Tip O'Neill. I direct them to his book, that All Politics is Local, and then I tell them to read that book and understand that, and Tip put it, I guess, in the most precise way. You can't get elected without asking someone for his or her vote. And I love the story about how he used to ask his wife every year, every election time, if she would vote for him, and she would say, "Tip, I'll consider it."
Yeah.
But there's no reason to expect that someone's going to vote for you unless you actually get a chance to meet that person and ask that person face to face, if possible, for their vote.
Right.
And that's the best way to campaign.
Now, you mentioned part of the reason that the Republican Party has appealed to you and continues to appeal to you is the notion of limited government. Now, there is a fine line between being invasive and being helpful and facilitating positive social
Services
goals.
the government provides, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Versus resources that it takes.
Now, you served, and this is an interesting fact, you served with Scott Brown in the state legislature and while Mitt Romney was governor. And, you know, and I wanted to go to a particular matter that made a lot of national press recently. This is the whole 47% controversy. Now, is that whole riff that we saw in that surreptitious videotape reflective of the Mitt Romney and please discuss your perspective on the opinions he voiced. Though I will tell you this, according to a transcript I read, he said, quote unquote, "the words that came out were not what I meant." And I'm not sure how one defines what that sentence means. The words the words that came out were not what I meant, as if they just sort of sprang with beyond his control out of his mouth.
Well, let me see if I can address that. First of all, when I was elected in 2002, I began as a state representative here in Massachusetts on January 1st, 2003, the day that I was sworn in. And when I went into the House chamber for the first time and found my seat, I was sitting right next to the gentleman from Rentham, Scott Brown.
Sure.
So Scott was among one of the first legislators I met when I was sworn in. The day after the House got sworn in, the governor got sworn in, and that's when I first met. Well, actually, I didn't first meet him. I met Mitt along the campaign trail, obviously, but first began working with him in January of 2003. And I really found him to be a very warm person. I think I spoke to you before off camera, Ben, when I was surprised that critics were making him out to be sort of a cold, robotic, aloof individual. And I don't know if you've had that experience, John. I just never thought that was Mitt Romney. I know him personally. I've had a chance to meet him and his wife, his family, to go to his home. And I was not at all put off by any kind of attitude of superiority or an attitude of cool aloofness. He seemed to be very much a family person, very much a warm, approachable guy. And I was glad to see that come out later on during the first debate.
But let me interject for a moment.
Yes, sure. Go ahead. I was going to say, with respect to that comment, I think he was having, they were doing some sort of house party somewhere, and he said that 47% of the people in America are lost to him, are going to vote for President Obama because they are in some way dependent upon the federal government for a living. They receive some kind of public benefit from the federal government, and he. I believe
the quote is, it says that that they don't want to take personal responsibility and care for their lives. And you know, on the face of it, again, if he was willing to repudiate that by saying the words that came out were not what I meant, how does one, I mean, look, it seems to me that when you put somebody in that position where he doesn't think he's being filmed, and he doesn't think he's being recorded, and he thinks he's among friends, that is not, that's the time when you're going to get the most candid perspective on his real views. And it's interesting you say that doesn't reflect his personal warmth.
No, it doesn't jive with his.
But personal warmth is not necessarily the issue here.
No, I think it's political strategy, and the fact that he was probably saying to his supporters, "I'm not going to win these people. I need to focus on the 53% out there that could vote for me if I'm going to win in November."
So you think he was talking about electoral strategy and not necessarily how he would govern?
I know the media jumped on that because it sounded juicy. It sounded like here you have this man who's writing off half of America.
Sure.
I don't think he writes them off, although they've been portrayed as victims. I don't think the governor would write them off. I think what the governor would think is that, and again, this is where your question about facts and perspective come into play. I think Mitt wants those 47% to be in his corner, to want them to be supporting his goal for what America should be, for what our federal government should be. But he doesn't think he's going to get them because they are reliant upon the government, because of our bad economy, because of the poor job numbers, because these folks need,
or because they're senior citizens or injured veterans or any other.
Yeah, and that came out later on the other side, saying, well, he's writing off veterans and seniors. I don't see that as being Mitt Romney's position.
John, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't want to attribute these to the representative because I don't think, from what I know of his work, it reflects that. But I think the challenge for Mitt Romney when this tape was published was it fed into, first, stereotypes that may or may not have been fair, but second of all, they really match his policy proposals. So I think that it's fair to say about Mitt Romney, and I guess without being too fresh, the current Mitt Romney, because the guy that you met after he got sworn in, policy-wise, is much different than the Mitt Romney that is here today. I guess I would accept maybe he's had this series of small revelations that have brought him there. But
well, in 10 years, we all changed somewhat.
Right. So the guy that won Massachusetts votes was someone who was pro-choice. He said he'd be better for gays than Ted Kennedy. He was very much a moderate, Bill Weldian type of Republican that put forward. He has evolved his positions in a pretty dramatic way that seemed coincidentally timed well for winning the Republican primary. And you know, that's the problem for Mitt Romney. He's disingenuous. Nobody can really nail down exactly what he thinks. Unfortunately, in that sphere of trying to get to the far right of the Republican Party and nail them down as a vote, he adopts rhetoric and language that before this tape was basically found on the right-wing blogosphere, this attacking the 47% and suggesting that America was a place where government dependence was a crisis for us and so forth. And, you know, while it's been out in that sort of crazy land of right-wing blogosphere, it doesn't get challenged or refuted. What Americans start wondering is that what goes on at those exclusive country clubs where people are driving in their six-figure cars and thinking that everybody else is a bunch of lugheads that are hanging on for support? And unfortunately, it seems Mitt Romney's a great guy. I mean, I think he's sort of mean to his dog, but he's good to his kids. You know, I mean, I'll give him a lot of things, right? But as a man who's putting forward a series of policy provisions that basically I would summarize as, if we continue to drive resources to the best, the brightest, the top, the richest, however measure you want of superlative at the top, that they will, by their graciousness, support and benefit everybody else. They will distribute opportunity to those who deserve it. I think our philosophy is much different than that the way you build an economy is a solid middle class, and you build it out, because when there's a middle class that's successful, then that benefits the business owners because they're customers. That benefits the people who are looking for a path up. Mitt Romney's philosophy, at least the 2012 version, is a classic thing. You know, I can't claim to know your mentor, Steve Pierce, but my feelings for him is that he's a genuine, reputable Republican who I'm probably going to disagree with on some of the specifics.
Sure.
I'm not sure, much like George W. Bush, Steve Pierce could win the Republican primary for president. His policy provisions, the things he had, the Republican Party, not only nationally, but honestly, Rep, some of your colleagues that have come in the last year are very serious right-wing Tea Partiers that make their hay at the trough of these right-wing talking points. And honestly, again, I don't want to attribute this to you because my understanding of last time I drove through Westfield, they were paving all the streets and fixing the sidewalks. Now that's a rep who's going to work for his constituents. That's kind of, and by the way, I don't see the rep's headlines on the Boston Herald or the tabloids because he's doing the day-to-day work. But many of the freshman Republicans who have landed in a Tea Party surge year that really propels them. I'm very proud that we're challenging almost all of them. not the rep. Maybe we'll find an opponent for him next time.
Good
But
luck
most
with
of the freshmen, most of the freshmen are being challenged by people who are really pushing back. And it's not just so much to make government programs accountable, but some of the debate and the rhetoric around the EBT cards, for example, are off the edge of characterizing the kind of people who benefit from it. And I think that rhetoric is what most Americans went back on. Because then if you take Mitt's percentage of 47% and say it's literally the question, then you can't get to 47% until you get every senior who's living on Social Security, every veteran who's living on some kind of assistance program, every college student who's trying to figure out and pay their way to get that degree, and they are dependent, they're not paying income taxes. When you realize of that 47%, the majority of them are working full time, but not making enough money to pay income taxes. They're paying sales taxes, they're paying excise tax on their car, they're paying everything else. But their income level is so low in this economy that they really need it. So I think that what Mitt really sparked a discussion about what it means, what his philosophy on the presidential trail means, and really contrasted very unfavorably with a president who's been working hard every day, moving on 40 months of continuous private sector job growth, 5 million new jobs, not enough, but heading in a direction, and illustrates the president's basic question to the voters. Are we going to move forward in this progress? Or are we going to go back to a kind of philosophy that really got us in the mess? And I think that's why the 47% blossomed into something bigger.
Right.
And yet there's another question that people ask too, and it's a question that's been asked in politics and political campaigns repeatedly. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? That's been asked many times. And I think the answer that a lot of people say today is, well, no, quite frankly, despite a president who everyone had elected with a lot of hope and positive warmth and thoughts that would change America for the better, he hasn't done that. And so 4 years later, the job numbers are still ridiculously high. And the president's trying to take credit for turning the economy around. A lot of people don't see that economy being better. The president went out and did a victory lap around the world and made apologies for America, claiming that he would make the relations between the United States and these other countries better. 4 years later, we see that they're not better. In fact, America is more of a dangerous situation because of that.
That's a talking point that I have to disagree with, because I don't think there has ever been an instance in which the president has apologized for America. I think that fits into a trope that the Republican Party would like to have people believe, but there has not been an instance in which the president has either overtly or implicitly apologized for this country.
President Obama is a president that does not want to embrace American exceptionalism for fear that that will offend other countries. And while I have no desire to offend our neighbors around the world, I believe that America is an exceptional country. We're a God-blessed country, and that we should pave the way for other countries and be that example. I go back to my question. 4 years later, are we better off?
4 years is a really good question, and so at least with a couple of these rep, I see you are familiar with some of the right-wing blogosphere. So, so the exceptionalism stuff, maybe I'll take back a little bit of that. But here's the thing: 4 years ago, today, we're a lot better, because 4 years ago we were losing 700,000 to 800,000 jobs a month. The international financial system was on the verge of collapse due to Republican laissez-faire policies and lack of regulation. What we were in at that point was
Barney Frank and Chris Dodd are Republicans.
No, and thank God for their efforts to put in.
No,
I would say the Dodd-Frank bill is exactly the kind of thing that's put regulation back in. And I know Mitt Romney wants to get rid of it. I know Scott Brown claims credit for the deciding vote after he pulled the bank's money out and left that to the taxpayers. But my point is, 4 years ago, we were in a disaster situation. So the real question, are you better off 4 years ago? Yeah, you are. If you had a kid who was fighting in the war,
that depends who you ask. If you're asking one of these folks that's unemployed after 4 years,
that's right. But if you had a son or daughter who was fighting in the war in Iraq and they're home, you're better off than you were, because President Obama brought that war to an end.
Here,
He's
here.
put us on a
Thank
time
God for
label.
our troops.
Let's put it this way. One guy who's not better off than he was 4 years ago is Osama bin Laden, who's been brought to justice. I'm focusing on the international stuff because the question of which one of these gentlemen are better prepared and better equipped to be our commander-in-chief is one of the serious questions voters are going to confront over the next couple of weeks. I think when you saw Barack Obama in the same position a couple of months away from election, he went across the world and was welcomed. When Mitt Romney landed, he offended the British. You can't, I mean, if you can't get along with the Brits, give me a break.
That he wasn't sure that the security in London was
exactly
up to
right,
the task.
and that wasn't the only
The media
thing.
loved that. They thought it was a huge
No, that's
slight,
not the only thing. As far as the work of diplomacy, not understanding the language when he went to 10 Downing Street and talked about how he looked out the behind. It's a different word. It's a different understanding. When he disclosed that he had a conversation about their Secret Service, that's a diplomatic mistake. That's lack of preparation. That's a guy who knows it all. And it's not just there, offending in Poland. When the U.S. ambassador was killed, his too early, inappropriate, aggressive language in campaigns. When other Democrats have been in office at a time of international crisis, Republicans step up and stand with the president. That Mitt Romney's temperament and his tactics and the international stage is one of the reasons why most Americans are really having some serious questions about him, and they're legit.
Well, I respectfully disagree with you there, John. I don't think most Americans are having concerns about Mitt Romney. In fact, we saw after the last debate, most Americans saw future President Romney do very, very well against our incumbent president, who seemed befuddled, bewildered, and lost on stage. Couldn't answer with any great specificity or detail about the inner workings of his own government. So we have a person like Governor Romney who looks very, very presidential up there.
Yeah, but specificity in a debate is important.
Mm-hmm.
Mitt Romney does have a $5 trillion tax cut, despite the fact that he lied about it. That's specific.
Well, I would say the
now,
president lied.
He performed well at the debate. He practiced a long time, and he performed well. I'm going to give that to him. But he does have a $5 trillion tax cut. By the way, in the debate specifically, he said his health care plan does take care of people with pre-existing conditions. Eric Fernstrom had to get out there into the spin room immediately to walk that back. That's false. And those were only two of the most obvious lies and misrepresentations. So in a very comfortable, confident, and smooth way, Mitt Romney performed well, stating things that weren't true. We'll see what the rest of the debates go. And honestly, I do give him credit. He scored well. Seems like he's scoring a little bit in the polls. But I think on the issues that people are really caring about, you know, as we've talked a little bit so far about truthfulness of debate, I think that there's no question about that. I give Romney points for his style and his performance in the debate. When you talk about our international affairs, Osama bin Laden is dead. And despite all the efforts of George W. Bush, that didn't happen. Mitt Romney said he wouldn't spend a lot of time on it. It's not a top priority. It was a top priority. Our president has ended the war in Iraq and has us on a trail to get there. He has rebuilt our relationships around the world. It is a situation where on international affairs, Barack Obama is a clear advantage for voters here. And on the issue of what direction the economy is going to go, I do think, honestly, that Mitt Romney's 47% reflects a mindset that says you drive all the cash and the benefits to those at the top, and they will trickle down on the rest of us. And I think the president's philosophy of building the middle class and then benefiting and building our economy out from there is a better philosophy. You put all these things together, we got a close race. People got a couple of weeks to make a decision.
Now, John, I wanted to ask you a question. Okay, what John is getting at, and I think what you sort of implicitly acknowledged, is that former Governor Romney has sort of evolved in some of his positions, and John would say that those are convenient evolutions depending upon whom he's speaking to and what office he's running for and who the electorate may be at that moment. Now, part of the documentation I had prepared for this conversation was an almost voluminous list of shifts to put it charitably, evolving positions on certain issues. And I know both of you can speak to this, but when somebody says the words that came out were not what I meant, that does give you, if you open that door, it does give you a significant sort of latitude to say whatever it is that you want to say at whatever time you deem it most convenient, so that there seems to be a lack of core principles. And please explain to me and to us, is there a core set of beliefs that you can point to of former Governor Romney that we as an electorate can hang our hats on as a potential future president?
Oh, of course. I think you can see Mitt Romney as the Mitt Romney from the Republican convention, the Mitt Romney from the debates that you saw last week, the Mitt Romney that you'll see next week in the next debate. A man who is comfortable being an executive, a leader, a fixer, someone who knows how to get into, whether it be a company, an organization, a government, and repair damage that others have done. I think you'll see, again, I keep calling him the future president, but my governor, Mitt Romney, continue to lay out specifics about what he will do as president and differentiate from himself from the existing president. I think you'll see a man who has a real strong belief in America and American values, and in the strength of our country being the individuals who make up this country, not just the middle class that everyone during this election team seems to talk about, but the wealthy, the entrepreneurs, the job creators, and those who have not yet had the success that he or we have enjoyed, the lower class, if you'll call them that, or the folks who are working poor. He believes in all aspects of those groups, and they are what we are going to hang our hat on to fix this country. We have only to have a government that gets out of the way and allows those people to succeed. And we have a government right now that for whatever reason, has had a very, very difficult time correcting the problems, correcting the economy to shift us in a more productive way. I think Mitt has proven through his experience with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, his experience with the Olympic Games, his experience with the individual companies, that he has that ability to get in, see a problem, put the right people to work on fixing that problem and resolve it. I, for one, would be very, very comfortable working or actually living in a country that was helmed by Mitt Romney.
Sure.
Where I cannot say the same thing for President Obama. And I had as much faith. Certainly I didn't vote for him 4 years ago. I voted for John McCain. But I was proud that our country would elect, for the first time ever, a black man to be the president of the United States. I had that same pride that I think a lot of Americans had, that glass ceiling, if you will be broken. And I had the same hope and wanted him to succeed. And again, I keep coming back to that 4 years later.
I want to ask you a very, we don't have a lot of time, but I want to ask you a very specific question, okay? Sure. It's one thing to be sort of theoretically proud that we as a nation elected our first black president, but I think that if you're intellectually honest, and you seem to be that way to me, you need to admit that there is a concerted effort across the country, largely headed by ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council, to implement voter suppression tactics in the guise of voter protection tactics. Now,
you mean by requesting someone show their identity and
that's exactly
who they
correct.
Are when they vote?
That's exactly
that's one of them.
I think that's a great idea.
Yes, exactly. No, that's
by the way, most Americans seem to think that that's a great idea. That you should have to prove who you are when you go to vote.
I understand that, but you see, if you gauge your policy based on what most Americans think, okay. Most Americans think, Mickey Mouse is a great cartoon character, but that doesn't mean we want to develop a public policy around Mickey Mouse, okay? And pardon the flip example, but if you are going to be, who was it, John, who said that, I think it was the Speaker of the House of Pennsylvania, who said, voter ID, which will allow Mitt Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania, done, okay? Now this is a moment of honesty.
So, listen, I appreciate, and I want to say for one thing about the 47% remark. I've been on the campaign trail. Those fundraisers at the end of very long days. I don't think it's the specific things. I think it's how it reflects as an accurate depiction of the policy choices. I think on the issue of voting, forever has been a nonpartisan issue. Forever increasing access to voting opportunities, making it easier, making it more straightforward. There are so many examples, not just things like the Voting Rights Act, which corrected immoral disparities, but a consistent look to how to welcome more people into participation in democracy. That really has been...
And we in Massachusetts, in the legislature, have actually voted for a lot of those things to improve access to voting for
no
our
question.
citizens.
And Massachusetts eliminated hanging chads before they became Florida, right?
Sure,
So there is a lot of benefit here, but it's not just. I mean, and I think it's not unfair to say that tactics that I think are suppressing that thing are universally Republican proposals across the country. It is aggressive voter ID laws, enforced mostly, and sadly, a couple instances here in Massachusetts of not the representative, but the right wing of his party in Southbridge and in New Bedford this year. Two nasty voter fraud cases in Massachusetts, in Marlborough, and here in Western Mass in East Hampton, I think it was, that are driven on this. But the basic push to drive into making it harder to vote are definitely driven statistically by the Republicans into demographics that are not helping them. So it's voter ID laws, it's cutting back voting hours, it's reducing early voting opportunities, it's on and on and on. You go to Ohio, 8 years ago, the reason that it took so long, one of the reasons before we got to the Florida disaster was that in Ohio there were long lines of people as the polls were supposed to close, people waiting in line for 10 hours to be able to vote. Overwhelmingly not sufficient resources in the African American and the poor districts. That was corrected in Ohio to create a system of more easy access to in-person early voting opportunities, and those problems have disappeared. This year, we're going to go back to the old system that had demonstrated problems. Thank God, court after court after court have ruled these efforts illegal and inappropriate. I think we'll all be in a better place when both parties come back to the nonpartisan position of making voting easier, making voting more accessible. The idea that somehow showing ID, that in-person voter fraud is a problem or it is an issue in the country. In Pennsylvania, when the Republicans put this forward, in the court case, the Republicans had to stipulate that there were no cases they could name. They couldn't anticipate any situations where it would be a problem. They had to give that issue up at the first step of the legal process. They completely lost. It's a political issue that is, and unfortunately in the case of the legislative leader in Pennsylvania, another inadvertent slip when he wasn't thinking people were going to pay attention, lay it out as a political ploy. It just is wrong.
And to your point earlier, Don, and I will close my views on the matter this way. You said somehow you supported the view that this is legitimate by saying that the American people support it.
I think people believe that you should have to prove who you are before you cast a ballot. Right.
Okay. Well, the problem we have in this country is that not enough people vote. Is, as John said, expanding access to the polls.
That's a big issue, certainly.
I can't imagine a situation under which people will pretend to be somebody else in order to vote. That's a red herring.
And yet it happens.
When?
Right.
Where?
It happens often.
No, it doesn't.
The fact that you can't name an example or name a case where it's thrown an election doesn't mean that.
No, I don't mean that it's thrown an election. I can't name instances where it happened, and I don't honestly, Representative. I don't think you can either.
Well, no, I certainly cannot.
Okay, right. and I'm not.
So why make
casting
it such
aspersions
a
on
big...
you? The Republican lawyers who were trying to pursue this couldn't name them either. This is a solution in search of a problem. It's not so much that people, I mean, the language around it, and again, this is a serious issue, and I don't attribute it to you, because I think that in Massachusetts, I wish we were a little bit better on early voting. But that's a bipartisan. We have to convince Democrats on that either.
That's
There's
correct.
lots of same-day registration, I think,
And
should
our
be
chief
considered.
election officer in Massachusetts.
I totally agree.
Bill
So
Galvin,
this
is
is
a
not
Democrat.
but in so many areas, Massachusetts in a bipartisan fashion, so I don't attribute this to you. But the truth of the matter is, Alec and some of your colleagues are actively engaged in leading that effort in Massachusetts, has been responsible for what is a blatant attempt to suppress the vote in poor, minority, and elderly areas. And the only consistency is those are constituencies that tend to vote Democrat. And it is really, and honestly, I don't put this on you, but as you are in council with your fellow Republicans, tell them to drop this stupid idea. There is no, you can't, I mean, when they've done year-long surveys around the country, they come up with 4 cases. I mean, in Massachusetts, there's been no in-person voter fraud, but there've only been 2 cases of voter fraud, both perpetrated by Republicans, that it is just not at that big a problem. These things are caught, they're stopped, and they're prosecuted. There's nobody carrying, it is a political tactic to favor one party over the other that is not worthy of, honestly, a legitimate party with legitimate values and legitimate ideas that I don't always agree with but deserve to be debated. This tactical manipulation of who gets to vote is beneath the dignity of the Republicans like yourself and Steve Pierce and George Bush and all kinds of other folks who have been able to win elections without this kind of honest bull.
And what I would say, add to that, John, is that you said it's a solution in search of a problem. And it would seem to me that, and honestly, Don, I mean, as a smart guy, it would seem difficult to see how you can contradict this. The problem is that poor people and minorities tend to vote Democratic. The solution, therefore, is to do the things that the national and local Republican parties have done. And that's the problem, that's the solution, but it is not, at least by my estimation, one that best represents American democracy. And if you can defend what your national colleagues and your fellow legislators are doing around the country, I'd love to hear it, but I'm not sure where you can and be intellectually honest.
My role as a state representative is fairly parochial. I speak for myself and my district and perhaps my colleagues in Massachusetts, but I do believe it's important to be able to prove who you are when you go into a voting place to cast a ballot. That has nothing to do with suppressing a vote or keeping people away from being able to vote. In fact, I've certainly taken votes in this legislature to enhance registration and to make it easier for people to vote. And I respect everyone and give them I believe they should have their right to cast their ballot as long as they are who they say they are.
And I would reinforce that. I believe that while I would be out knocking on doors for any Democrat running against a Republican, overwhelmingly, the Republican legislators in Massachusetts have the things we disagree on do not include access to voting. And I think that reflects in a situation in our Commonwealth where these kind of things don't have a snowball's chance. And I hope that that will always be the case.
Now, I want to finish the conversation with a brief talk about the Senate race. Now, there's a debate, as we all know, in Springfield this evening, and it pits, as we all know, and as candidate Warren pointed out last time, or as the moderator pointed out, Massachusetts has a history of not electing women for statewide and national office, governorships, and for this U.S. Senate. Now, we know, obviously, Elizabeth Warren is a woman, and one of the operative questions that has been posed to Senator Brown is, do you support equal pay for women? And he does not. And I'm curious, as a former colleague of his, whether you share that opinion or how women are supposed to respond to that, because in this day and age, I can't imagine that being an even remotely defensible position. In fact, what he is quoted as having said is that paycheck fairness and efforts to close the wage gap are a, quote, burden on business. Now, is that a reasonable position and is that a good reason to oppose equal pay for equal work?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. I'm not familiar with the legislation that Senator Brown, I believe, opposed. I think that's what you're talking about. It happened in Washington, D.C., and I work in Boston, so I can't answer the question for you.
But philosophically, would you say
Oh,
that
philosophically, women deserve to be paid the same if they do the same work as men.
Right. Well, I would suggest if you have that opinion, you might relate that to Scott Brown.
So, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, Massachusetts, like most of the country, has a dismal record of electing women. And that, when I say dismal, it doesn't mean no record. It means that proportionally women make up more than half the voting population, and in no place do they make up anywhere close to more than half of the elected officials. Now, we're making progress, right? Which is not to say enough, and I hope that in 4 weeks we're going to make one more progress and finally send a strong woman to the United States Senate from Massachusetts. But even Western Mass, I mean, on a bipartisan base, Martha Coakley and Jane Swift are from the wonderful North Adams question. We've done this. We've got Nikki Songus in the Congress. Suzanne Bump is another Western Mass, not a native, but a current resident here and doing a great job for us. I think there are some remarkably talented women mayors across Massachusetts. There are some, the representative has some fabulous women colleagues in the legislature, state senate, maybe even more so.
The Senate president is a woman, the head of our Senate body.
We need a lot more work. It's why I'm excited that Western Mass is a recent destination for Emerge Massachusetts, which is an organization to train and support Democratic women to run. I think it's really an important piece. I think Senator Brown, honestly, you know, every poll that comes in shows this is a dead heat race. They move back and forth of who's up 2 or 3 points.
Sure.
I think one of the big dynamics there for the senator is he's having a tough time convincing women. I think his vote against equal pay is hard to defend. When the question is on the issue of women's control of their own health care choices, not only does Scott Brown support the Blunt Amendment, but honestly, unconscionably, I think, is a co-sponsor of it. That basically says employers get to choose based on their moral beliefs, not just Catholic hospitals or universities, but any employer based on their moral beliefs can decide access to issues like birth control. That's the kind of difference in philosophy that women get. You know, and it's really important. It's not just women that the Senate is going to struggle with. When he says still to this day he wants to repeal Obamacare, well, there are 20,000 young people in Massachusetts who've stayed on their parents' health insurance that Scott Brown's saying he wants to throw them off. 70,000 seniors that already have benefited in their prescription drug costs by closing the donut hole in Obamacare. 70,000 seniors have saved $648 on average. Scott Brown's opposition to that means he wants them to rise. Even in Massachusetts.
Wait a minute, John, that's not true.
Well, no, if he wants to get rid of Obamacare.
No, we've always said remove or replace Obamacare.
With what?
Well, there's been plans from everything from what we did here in Massachusetts
to
other plans
thing.
from
come on.
Washington, D.C.
Obamacare and
it's
I
easy
won't
for
even
your
like to
Democrats.
call it
Like
Romneycare. I like to call it Deval Patrick Care because he's the one who implemented it. They're the same plans. The differences them are so small as to be minute. But here's the deal. There are 70,000 seniors in Massachusetts who are paying less for prescription drugs thanks to Obamacare. And if Scott Brown wants to repeal it, that's the end result, whether he wants to or not. Even more important, 1.3 million people in Massachusetts, even with our historic health care reform, which I think you voted for, and I think yes. That was a bipartisan bringing together. Ted Kennedy and Mitt Romney, that's bipartisan, and it came together, taking Republican ideas and Democratic ideas and figuring out a way. Even with that, 1.2 million people in Massachusetts are benefiting right now from the preventive care provisions of Obamacare. Scott Brown's position to repeal those just don't fly. And you know, it's not just women, it's not just, I mean, there are so many places where Scott Brown, his voting record does not match his rhetoric. And unfortunately in this race, as Elizabeth Warren has been pushing hard to make this race about issues, Scott Brown has been relentless and unforgiving in just making it, as soon as he couldn't get around driving the truck and the coat around, pretending he's a nice guy, and the polls started closing and Elizabeth Warren started gaining, we see Karl Rove and the boys in here, and Brown's campaign, including reprehensible actions by his staff, have been relentlessly personal negative attacks. Scott Brown has attacked Elizabeth Warren, her husband, her daughter, her parents, her grandparents, her profession, her salary. It is just a relentless continuing personal attack because he can't defend his votes. And I think that's what we'll see tonight in Springfield. It's always interesting to tape. That's not going to play till after the debate. So all our predictions are going to be laid bare to see who was right on this. But I think it's a great race. The big thing in all these races are up for grabs, right? Democrats, Republicans, independents, your vote really matters here. You got until the 17th of this month, 17th of October, to register to vote. All of the college students, if there are any holding these cameras, make sure your friends are registered to vote. Get out, knock on doors for whichever of these candidates you like. There's a real chance to make a difference here.
And I would, to John's point, I want to ask you a question. Okay, this whole, you can argue all day long as to whether or not David Gregory should have spent, 10 or 12 minutes during the last debate about charges around Elizabeth Warren's heritage. Okay,
her claims of being Native American.
Even when you say claims, okay,
Well,
that's
she
a loaded
claimed to
word,
be
and you know that. She has stated.
And hasn't been able to prove that claim.
Who's supposed to, look, I was told by my parents
I'm an Irish
that
American.
my,
I can prove that I have relations in Ireland. John's an Irish American.
Why would I doubt that?
But you know what
Why
I
would
can't
I
prove
doubt
that?
that?
I can't prove the fact that my dad told me when he came over on a boat, he almost died. That's part of my story, man. I am forever sad I didn't ask him for a doctor's note. But very few people don't believe what their parents and grandparents say. And listen, here's the deal. We can go on and on about, the reality of Native Americans in this country, particularly in Oklahoma, that people who didn't want to sign on the list and her ancestors that didn't want to get on the list of being Native American. So that's why you can't prove it. There's the suggestion from Scott Brown that she has benefited in some way is the most egregious. Ronald Reagan's lawyer has said she didn't. If that's not enough, then I don't know what the truth is. It is just absolutely, there's lots of discussion around this, and certainly nobody can defend the actions of Brown's staff and supporters in racist type stuff. But the truth of the matter is, Elizabeth Warren is driving a campaign about issues and the middle class and making Wall Street pay and the things people care about. And Scott Brown's campaign is relentless and unforgiving, personal, nasty attacks. That's the real contrast in the race so far. I hope we're going to spend, I'm not so hopeful that I say we won't talk about this crazy stuff, including, David Gregory did not shower himself in glory when he asked about the kings and queens stuff either. It's like, okay, that was my clip. We had fun with it for a couple weeks. That's the goofy part of campaigns. Enough kings and queens, enough Native American. Let's talk about how you're going to vote when you get to the Senate. Right. That's what people care about.
And will you be an independent voice for your district, or will you be a rubber stamp for the Harry Reid? I mean, and we have a proof that,
right.
We'll see what happens.
Right,
it's going to be interesting. There's no question, John. We have, and the people watching us have that opportunity to vote on November 6th. I hope they'll take their chance to do that. We talked off camera. If you don't vote, you don't have that ability to complain later on. If you don't like the way your country is going, the direction your state is going, and you didn't get into the booth and fill in the oval or pull the lever, you don't have the right to complain about it. Be involved in that process now. And I'm happy to support Mitt Romney and Scott Brown. These are gentlemen that I've worked with, that I know personally, I know their families, and I'm very comfortable with the direction that they would take our country, our Commonwealth.
Well, with that, I want to thank both Chairman John Walsh of the State Democratic Party, State Rep Don Humason, and thank you to our audience for watching this segment of Politics 24.